All right, welcome back. This is presentation 3 of chapter 10, Congress. In this chapter, we're going to start getting into kind of what Congress actually does, the committee system, their leadership, things like that. So let's jump in. Congressional organization determines power. A well-organized Congress where the leadership has trust and can work with other leaders is likely to be a productive one, and to more accurately express the will of the people than a disorganized Congress whose leaders don't trust one another, which is sort of the situation we have right now. Party leadership in the House. Again, mid-century American political scientist named E.E. Schattschneider said that democracy is unthinkable save in terms of parties. So while the political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, much of the actual work that is done in Congress is controlled by the parties. So each party holds a gathering. The Democrats call it a caucus, and the Republicans call it a conference, and they select the party leadership. The Speaker of the House is the leader of the majority in the House of Representatives, and of course we've had 2 examples of Speaker elections in this past year. Kevin McCarthy had to go through 15 ballots to become Speaker. He had the shortest speakership in the modern era. He was replaced by this guy Jackson of Louisiana, who is really, Michael Johnson, I should say, who may not last very much longer either. So the minority and majority leaders, they're the people that manage the day-to-day operations of the House. And then you also have whips, and their job is to coordinate legislative strategy, build support for key legislation, and they're the ones that tell the leadership whether they have the votes or not. So if the Speaker of the House allows a bill to come to the floor and it fails, it's because his whip system has failed him and failed to do the job of letting him know that they have 218 votes. Party leadership in the Senate. The person mentioned in the Constitution is actually the President pro tempore. You also have the Vice President, but that's, again, they're not, they're only nominally presiding officers of the Senate. The President pro temp is largely a ceremonial leadership position given to the senator from the majority party with the longest tenure. The real power in the Senate lies with the majority and minority leaders, and they have to work together again to control the Senate's legislative calendar, to control, how bills come to the floor. In the past, Senate leaders emphasized mutual respect to minimize conflict, but in recent years, partisan polarization has meant the increased use of filibusters and really a decline of trust between the leadership of the 2 parties. The current Senate Majority Leader, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, and the Minority Leader, Kentucky Mitch McConnell, who's actually stepping down, they've both been, they've switched back and forth a couple of times. McConnell has a tremendously contentious relationship with Schumer. They don't really like one another. They don't trust one another. And so, again, it's very difficult to get things done. The committee system is very important. Woodrow Wilson captured the importance of the committees by observing Congress in general session is Congress on public exhibition, whilst Congress in its committee rooms is Congress at work. So committees and subcommittees allow Congress to work on many things simultaneously. And there are 4 different types of committees. Standing committees exist across legislative sessions and have the power to propose and write legislation. The Rules Committee is among the most important of the standing committees, especially in the House. And I don't believe there really isn't a Senate Rules Committee. It decides the order in which bills will be presented to the floor for a vote and the length of time and rules devoted to debate. Other important standing committees include the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, both of which have jurisdiction over taxes, trade, and expansive entitlement programs. So those are standing committees. Select committees are usually ad hoc, which is Latin for temporary. They don't have authority to propose legislation. The House and Senate Select Committees on Intelligence are exceptions. Select committees are usually formed when leadership wants to investigate something that falls outside the normal scope of standing committees. The decision by Nancy Pelosi to form a select committee to investigate the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol riot illustrates one rationale for why a committee like that would be formed. You also have joint committees. They're also temporary committees formed by members from both the House and the Senate. There are currently 4 such committees: economic, taxation, library, and printing. And they, again, lack the authority to present legislation. The Joint Economic Committee and the Joint Taxation Committee have often played important roles in collecting information and holding hearings on economic and financial issues. And finally, you have conference committees, and these are, again, temporary committees formed at the request of the Speaker and the presiding officer of the Senate to iron out differences between House and Senate versions of a bill. Under the Constitution, both houses have to pass identical legislation in order for a bill to be presented to the president for signature. So politics in the organization of committees. Previously, the norm of seniority meant that the senior-most member of the majority party automatically assumed the chair position on standing committees. Since the 1990s, Republicans have increasingly strayed away from seniority as a determining factor for committee leadership. Republicans launched other reforms designed to improve efficiency, reducing the number of subcommittees when they hold the majority, and imposing term limits on committee chairs. These reforms have contributed to the decline of committee influence over the legislative process. In 2007, or since 2007, Democrats returned to the seniority rule for committee chair positions. And oftentimes when Republicans have control, what will happen is if someone is termed out and they had been chair of one committee, they'll move to another committee so that they can chair that standing committee rather than be simply a member of the committee. A lot of times, again, these guys, it's about ego, and sometimes it's about, they're good at being chairs. I don't know. The staff system: each House and Senate member have office staff who fulfill a wide range of responsibility. Congressional staffers attached to the House and Senate members' offices handle constituent requests and dealing with legislative details and the activities of administrative agencies. Staffers often bear the primary responsibilities for formulating and drafting legislative proposals, organizing hearings, dealing with administrative agencies, and negotiating with lobbyists. Most member-to-member interactions take place between respective staffers rather than between members themselves. Congress also employs more than 2,000 committee staffers who are typically retained regardless of which party is in the majority. Committee staff positions have historically been considered administrative and apolitical, but committee staff can often play key roles in the legislative process. The point being, obviously, the higher profile you have and the greater the role you play in something controversial, the more likely is if Congress changes hands, you're going to be out of a job. Congress also employs large staff agencies that provide the legislative branch with resources and expertise independent of the executive branch. And the 3 main staff agencies are the Congressional Research Service, which is the CRS, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, and the Congressional Budget Office. The CRS performs research for members who want to know facts and competing arguments relative to proposals for or other legislative business. The GAO enables Congress to investigate the financial and administrative affairs of any governmental agency or program, and the CBO performs economic estimates of the cost of legislative proposals and things like that. It's the congressional analog to the Office of Management and Budget, which we'll talk about in later chapters. The rules of lawmaking explain how bills become a law. The institutional structure of Congress helps to shape the legislative process. And institutional structure refers to the differences in the size of the two houses of Congress and the differing roles each house, as described in the Constitution. So the House, for example, is responsible for originating all revenue bills, and they begin the impeachment process. The Senate, in contrast, has extensive advice and consent responsibilities over executive branch and federal judges and justices. They also are the ones where impeachment trials are held. So equally important are the rules of congressional procedure, which govern everything from the introduction of a bill to its submission to the president for signature. The idea of regular order is essential for the legislative process. But in the era of partisan polarization, regular order has oftentimes been replaced by a more improvisational new order. Committee deliberation. Most bills can originate from either the House or the Senate. Again, revenue bills always begin with the House. And oftentimes members, you'll have both houses of Congress working simultaneously. But oftentimes one house will say, well, we know what we want to do. Let's see what they can get, before we waste any time. Once drafted, a bill is submitted to the clerk of the House or the Senate, where it's assigned a number and then given to a committee. Most bills die in committee, okay? Again, the reason is that, again, there are a lot of ways for bills to die, and committee chairs can simply say, I don't want to schedule a hearing on this, and that effectively will kill it. In the House, the Rules Committee again decides the schedule for debate and vote and scheduling votes on a bill, and they may adopt an open or closed rule for debate. An open rule means that you can amend the bill from the floor. However, with such polarization and such a lack of trust between the parties, neither party, when they're in the majority, are oftentimes inclined to have open rules, and that's, again, too bad. Debate. In the House, debate rules determine the amount of time available for debate and whether amendments can be proposed. The time is generally controlled by the bill's sponsor and the lead opponent of the bill. The Senate is unique among the world's legislative bodies for its commitment to unlimited debate, and that gives rise to the tactic of the filibuster, which basically involves talking a bill to death, basically holding the floor and preventing action on legislation. There is only one way to end a filibuster, and that is to invoke cloture. And to successfully invoke cloture, 3/5 of the Senate, or 60 senators, must vote to close debate. From 1917 until 1975, cloture required 2/3 vote, or 67 votes, to close debate. The dramatic increase in the use of filibusters has raised the possibility of invoking what is known as the nuclear option. And it's not an official part of the Senate rules, but following from Rule 20 of the Senate standing rules, in which the Senate Majority Leader raises a point of order, knowing that it violates a standing rule, the presiding officer would deny the point of order based on the Senate rules, and then this ruling would be appealed and overruled by a simple majority vote, creating a new precedent. This establishes an effective loophole, enabling the majority to change the rules governing debate. The first contemplated use of the nuclear option came in 2005, when then Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist threatened to invoke the nuclear option to end Democratic-led filibusters of Bush-nominated judicial nominees. A compromise forestalled that threatened nuclear option, but in 2013, Democratic Majority Leader Harry Reid successfully invoked the nuclear option to close off filibusters for executive branch nominees and federal judges, but not Supreme Court nominees. And again, the reason he did that was that Republicans were basically denying, appointments by Barack Obama. They were trying to hold off and build up a huge backlog of judges that a Republican president would then be able to fill. In 2016, Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell expanded the nuclear option to include Supreme Court nominees, and thereby secured the nominations of Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, packing the court effectively. Amendments, holds, and voting. Senate rules allow, again, virtually unlimited ability to propose amendments to a pending bill. Each amendment requires a vote, and the introduction of new amendments can only be stopped by unanimous consent of the Senate. Senators also, again, have the power to issue holds on bills to delay a debate. Placing a hold on a legislation amounts to an announced intent to filibuster. Prior to 2007, holds could be secret, enabling senators to stop legislation without taking responsibility. Since 2007, senators have been required to identify themselves in the congressional record. Once a bill is debated on both floors, both houses on the floor, the leaders then schedule it for a vote in each chamber. Leaders generally don't bring legislation to the floor unless they believe they have the votes. But again, with partisan polarization, you're seeing, weird things happen where leaders bring bills to the floor and they lose. Conference committee, again, the House of Representatives and Senate must pass identical versions of a bill. Conference committees are comprised of members of both houses, and they work out compromise versions of legislation, which then have to go back to both houses and secure another majority. Opponents of a bill will often use conference votes as a last-ditch effort to defeat a measure. Again, it's with our current environment, conference committees can be very bruising affairs. That's it for this presentation. When we come back, we have one more presentation on Chapter 10, and then we'll be moving on to Chapter 11 on the presidency. I will see you next time.